Hi, everybody, and welcome to this video about noun groups. A lot of you have been asking me about this, and I've been promising to record a video, and so finally, here it is. Um, English is unusual in that it doesn't group its nouns. It's not the only language that doesn't, but most of the languages that we study in this country do. They don't all group their nouns in the same way. For example, the ones that we're probably most familiar with, French, Spanish, Italian, they group their nouns into two, and they call them masculine and feminine. And note that I say here masculine and feminine. I don't say male and female. The grammatical terms are masculine and feminine. But these are not the only way that you can group nouns. There are other European languages that also have two groups of nouns. So languages such as Swedish, Danish, Dutch, they group their nouns into two, but they call them common and neuter. And then languages that are perhaps more unusual for us, such as Basque or Georgian, they separate their nouns into two as well, but they call them animate and inanimate. And then languages like German or Romanian or Polish or Russian, they group their nouns into three groups and they call them masculine, feminine, and neuter. And then languages like Swahili, they have 18 different noun groups. Chinese separates its nouns into groups. And when you're talking about how many of something you've got, you use something called a measure word, and you change the measure words depending on the group the noun is in. And there are about 150 different measure words. So, for example, Chinese will group its nouns into people, big animals, small animals, long, thin things. So the word for snake, for example, doesn't come into the animal group, it comes into the long thin group with things like rulers. Um, so as you can see, there are just lots and lots of different ways that nouns can be grouped. It's not just masculine and feminine. There are a lot of different ways that you can group them, and there are a lot of different things that they are called. Let's return to the idea then of masculine and feminine just for a moment, because these are the two groups that I'm asked about the most often. So obviously, we use those terms to describe biological gender. But in languages, these terms are nothing to do with biological gender, they are grammatical gender. And for a lot of people, especially people who are beginners to learning a language, it's really difficult for them to understand this concept because these words are so linked to our ideas of gender concepts in everyday usage. It's quite difficult for beginners to understand that when it comes to language, it's not about biology. They are purely grammatical terms. Um, and so people will say to me, for example, well, what's so feminine about a table? And the answer is nothing. So a table is feminine in French, une table. It's feminine in Spanish, una mesa. But in German, it's masculine, der Tisch. It's a masculine word. So there is nothing feminine about a table. It's not feminine in every language. In Italian, it's both. So in Italian, we can have un tavolo masculine or una tavola feminine, depending on the context that you're talking about, which just really proves that there is nothing masculine or feminine about these words. They really are just grammatical terms. The word for car is another example. So in French, a car is feminine. In Spanish, it's masculine. In German, it's neuter. There is nothing feminine or masculine about a car. It is purely the grammatical gender that is used. Um, you would think that people would be an example where gender is really related to the person in a language, but even that is not the case. So, for example, the French word for a child is un enfant. So, this picture here that you see, this boy, this is un enfant. But this girl, this is also un enfant because the word for child is masculine in French. It doesn't matter if it's a girl, it's still un enfant because the word is masculine. It's really nothing at all to do with being male or female. You might think that the word for a girl would have to be feminine, but no. In German, it's das Mädchen. It's a neuter word. It's not feminine. Like I said, for a lot of people, this is really easy to get their heads around, and for other people, not so much, especially for beginners who have never come across this concept before. And what I often find is that beginners will try to change the gender of a word to match the gender of a person. So here's an example. The word for a shirt in Spanish is feminine, la camisa. It's a feminine word. It doesn't matter whether it's a woman or a man wearing it, it's still la camisa. So here's a man wearing the shirt, it's still la camisa. What I often find is that people try to change that gender and they will call it el camiso, which is really wrong, but they will do that if it's a man wearing it because they think they have to change the gender of the noun to match the person wearing it. And this is just not the case at all. Um, so la camisa, the shirt, is a shirt. It's a feminine word, regardless of who is wearing it. It doesn't change. That's just not how language works. The question I find myself asking then when I'm teaching a language to beginners is this. Are these words, masculine and feminine, actually important for learning a language? And when you consider that there are so many different words for noun groups, and when you consider how much confusion these words masculine and feminine can cause for beginners, I would argue that no, they're not. The only thing we really need to know is how many groups there are and which groups they belong to. We just need to identify do the nouns belong to this group or that group. And so when I'm teaching a language, um, especially for short courses or taster sessions, I want to make things as straightforward as I possibly can so that learners get to use useful vocabulary and the correct language, but without me overcomplicating things. And this whole masculine feminine thing is something that just seems like an unnecessary complication. If you're going to study a language to a higher level, yes, you need to know them. If you want to study them to university level, you need to know them. If you want to teach them, you need to know them. If you just want to learn a few words so that when you go on holiday you can order a drink or find your way around, you don't need to know them. And so I just tried to illustrate these nouns in a different way just to make it clear to people they belong to this group or to that group. There are various ways that we could do this. But personally, I find colours are very effective. It's very different from using the words masculine and feminine, so we don't have the confusion over those terms. It's easy to indicate when I'm preparing the slides because I can just put them into those colours and then people can see at a glance which ones belong in the same group. Um, and so I tend to call them blue group and red group when I'm teaching, but I could just as easily call them group A and group B. I could call them group one and group two. And in fact, that's how Latin groups are named. They are just called the first, the second, the third, and so on. And so all that really matters when you're learning a new word is, does it belong to this group or that group? And when I use the color coding, you can see just at a glance that this word that begins with la or ang, it's in the blue group. This word that begins with la or un, it's in the red group. And you don't need to think about it more deeply than that. How do you know which group they belong to? Well, that is not so easy. And unfortunately, that just has to be learned. When you learn a new word, you just have to learn which group it belongs to. There isn't a shortcut. There are a few letter combinations that will suggest which group it belongs to, but that I think is definitely a subject for another video on another occasion. So for now, just know that when we learn French or Spanish, there are two groups. When we learn German, there are three groups. and it really doesn't matter what those groups are called, as long as you know how many there are and you know um, which which words belong in the same group. It really doesn't matter what they are called. I hope that helps. I hope that clears things up for the people that have been asking me for the proper grammatical terms. And I just hope it explains to them why I've been using colours. And I hope for the people who are really happy with the colours, I hope that just gives you a little insight into those different colours represent what they're for. Um, so yes, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it's been helpful to you. And I really look forward to seeing you in one of my future language lessons.